first assignment in CDC302 is a shadow map of the figure. It's going to be exactly the same as the assignments we were working on last term, but you're just going to get a little more time to work on it. So you have 9 hours total to complete this drawing. I don't expect you to move past the shadow mapping stage. If you're a little more advanced, then perhaps by the end of this 3-week pose, you might be able to fill in the shadow map and have it be a notan and start working on the notan from there, just to again check the idea of shapes and measure shapes instead of just simply measuring lines. It might improve your sensitivity a little bit and be able to correct some of those shapes. But here's an example of what we might expect to see. Keep in mind, this is a drawing that I did, a demonstration that I did. It's on 18 by 24 paper. This is the size that we should be working on for as a standard. Notice I've got her about an inch. It was a little more than an inch, but since I had the clip up here, I went an inch from the clip there. Inch at the top, and then running her off the page on the bottom. Notice when I ran her off the page, I made certain that it's below the knees. Never cut off the model at the knees or the ankles or the middle of the feet. It always has to be well thought out and well placed. We're trying to design this to be a comfortable looking placement on the page. Also notice, I boxed it in, and then from there I worked the drawing and carved it out. You have the option, if it's a pose like this, where we can treat the model as one solid shape, it may make sense to just carve out the shape. I think that's how I did this one. I went from the main box, and then it looks like I took a scheme line up and the scheme line here. And then from there I started to cut in and carve out some of the lines. Now if we're working with a model where everything is not so compact and solid, where maybe we have arms sticking out, or maybe the model is standing, it may not be the most advisable situation to carve out the whole body as an envelope. Because if the model, for example, is standing and they shift, well, all of a sudden your scheme lines start to shift, and we need to make sure that those schemes are pretty solid before we start building onto them. So it may be better that after you knock in your box, that you jump into the torso and just box in the torso and start to carve out the torso. And after you cut a few scheme lines for the torso, maybe start shadow mapping the torso and give yourself a nice solid torso base to build the rest of the drawing on. That's another common working method. Get a good solid torso, because the torso will move for the most part as a unit, and it doesn't shift too much over itself. So for example, the pectoralis aren't going to be shifting too much over the ribs. The model might drop their shoulder or something like that, but it's usually easy to identify and rectify. Whereas an arm, that elbow can swing out or down. Feet positions change, even as the model shifts to remain comfortable or be able to continue sitting without falling over. So it may work out better for you to figure out the torso first. I still want you to do a box for the overall drawing. So I want you to box it in, get a good placement, get good proportions on the page. This is critical. We don't want to get to painting and be so bad with controlling our proportions and size that our models start to inappropriately run off the page. So we need to have a lot of control there as well. So box for the overall figure, and then you can do a basic scheme and move into a torso, or you can do a basic scheme and start to carve out the whole figure from that. One other thing to consider is to leave the head for last, if you even get to it at all. Don't bother boxing in the head. We tried that for a while. Didn't work out too well, because then as the students tried to count heads down, there was often a tiny, minuscule imperfection in their measurement, which stacked between 5 and 8 times, and thus created figures that were far too long or far too short, or made their widths incorrect. So try to reserve the head for the end. Remember, as we shadow map, we often take the width of the figure that we're measuring and compare it to the height of the figure, get a good proportional comparative measurement, and then we can use that width to break down and make smaller measurements. And ultimately, you can probably use the head as a unit of measurement to check, but don't use the head as a unit of measurements to base your measurements off of. Because again, even if the model tilts their head a little up or a little down, all of a sudden your head measurement changes, and then you can compound a lot of issues. Whereas if we take a big broad measurement like the whole width compared to the height, that's usually going to remain pretty similar all the way through, and we can fine tune it a little bit if we need to, and it won't be a huge deal. So keep that in mind. Stay away from the head. Don't even shadow map out the head. Stop at the neck here like I did. Leave the head. We're going to be working on the head in CDC301, so you don't need to bother with the head. We'll get to that later. I just want to see a nice, good, solid shadow map of the figure. You work on white sketch paper, since we're not going to shade this. You don't need to work on higher quality paper. You don't need to work on toned paper. You can work in Willow like I did there, or you can opt to work in pencil just to get practice working with the pencil. Like we mentioned before, you may end up finding that the pencil line yields a more precise measurement even than the Willow, because it can be a finer line if you keep your pencils sharp. So you may want to start with pencil and see if that improves your accuracy. Just keep in mind that the pencil won't be as easily erased as the Willow often is. So either choice is yours. But we'll follow the same procedure for this 3-week drawing here as we did for our drawings in level 200. Hopefully we'll just get a little further and have a nice solid shadow map by the end of it.